While I have made fun of Life is Strange for having some excessive memeage and some for shizzle yo moments, in truth, the underlying structure of their dialogue is extremely good, and we can learn a lot by looking at how their dialogue works. In basic form, you can break dialogue up into a couple of specific types, and we're going to go over those types, and we're going to talk about the best ways to implement them. Should be fun. Let's get to it.
Max, try to find the light for the pool. I want to see the sharks.
Players get distracted and they can't read your mind, so you're probably going to have to write a lot of instructional dialogue. This is a good example of it.
Otters don't like sharks. They bite. So do I. Hit that light. Hi. You look lost.
Close. Do you know if the bus has come yet? The online schedule isn't working.
Color dialogue like this is pretty easy to write because it has such a low bar. It doesn't need to be good. The player is volunteering to hear it, and they can skip it if they change their mind and decide it's not worth hearing. You already know, as a player, that there's not going to be anything mission critical in this color dialogue, so, you can play it fast and loose, who cares? Definitely include some, but don't sweat over it too much. You can do it as a warm-up if you need to get back into the flow of things.
I don't know. It runs pretty regularly.
I cannot miss this job interview. But I've got to take the bus out of Arcadia Bay to Newport just to find work.
Are things that bad here?
Where are things good? I can't even afford to live here.
Color conversation isn't random. It's there to punch up some aspect of your world, to add color. And in this case, we're learning that Arcadia Bay is really depressed. And it's a pretty good job of doing that. So don't write random color dialogue. Always support your universe.
Well, good luck.
Thanks, I sure need it.
Incidentally, if you wanted to do color dialogue where the player has a lot of options to ask about things, feel free. But be careful, if you make that web of possible options too dense, the player can feel like they're being pushed into exploring something they just don't care about. So you should generally keep your color dialogue options short and snappy. No dialogue arcs are required, and you shouldn't have any.
Isn't this awesome sauce? Totally reminds me of when we were kids. Come on, Slowpoke! Hold on.
So this is the video game twin of pacing dialogue, and I might call it functional dialogue. It's dialogue that exists solely to shepherd the player into a new area or a new gameplay element. And in this case, the dialogue exists to explain why we're on our own, at least temporarily, what sort of situation we're in, and how our characters feel. None of that stuff gets explicitly stated, of course. A lot of the context comes from the camera shots of the surrounding area and the body language involved. But in general, this kind of dialogue gets the player settled in really well, and it does not have to be very long or very expressive or even explain anything. It just has to exist and have the right pacing. Here's a bit of quick and easy functional dialogue to describe to the player where we are now and what the scene is and how we feel about it, in a couple of fun little moments, aided by, of course, these wide camera shots.
We're in the otter's lair.
Big fucking deal. I want that heated water.
We still have to play it cool, okay? I still go to school here.
You can own this hellhole once you figure out your rewind power. Boys or girls?
This kind of stupid little scene really does build a connection between the player and the characters and each other. So if you have a nice lax time with a nice slow pacing, think about putting some character refinement like this in.
Girls, of course.
Girls. Ooh la la. Let me check to see if the pool's heated.
Everybody needs to know how to write exposition dialogue. You've got stuff you need to explain. How do you explain it as fast as possible? Who is this person? What's their relationship to you? What is the plot point you're involved with? What's the scenario? And how can you explain all of that without being incredibly dull and boring? One basic trick is to use clustering. So these three characters are in a love triangle. So in order to introduce all three of these characters, the easiest way is to just have all three of them in the same place at the same time. Their relationship will naturally emerge very, very smoothly because they're all involved in the exact same plot point.
Excuse me, Mr. Jefferson, can I talk to you for a moment?
Yes. Excuse you.
No, Victoria. Excuse us.
3 very quick lines of dialogue later, and we now know everyone's personality and their relationships to each other. This would have been a lot more clumsy if their relationships weren't revolving around a single point. These 3 are in a love triangle, and therefore their relationships are all based on that, making it super easy to write this kind of dialogue. Otherwise, it would have felt kind of out of left field.
I'd never let one of photography's future stars avoid handing in her picture.
Jefferson has been really supportive of Max, way too supportive, and that's been on purpose. The writers are actively trying to draw the player's attention to the fact that Jefferson is really pretty into Max, and that is the whole point of these lines. Using a fake choice to let us choose what we think Max is like is a great way to have us form a connection with Max. Also, this is actually a puzzle line, because later on we'll come back and take a third option.
Do I have to? I just don't think it's that big a deal.
We already know Max thinks this is a huge deal, and here she is telling a social lie about how it's not. That tells us a huge amount about her character, and as I've mentioned several times, the overall context is critical. The overall context here is Max is lying, and we know she's lying, and that lets us see a lot more about her character. When is Max willing to lie, and what is she willing to lie about? That's a surprisingly important part of nearly any character.
Max, you're a better photographer than a liar. Now, I know it's a
This
drag,
is
but you're
flat-out exposition dialogue, and it's fairly dull, but it's coming out of a character's mouth, and he feels strongly about us, and he's energetic, so it is a lot better than if it was just flatly stated or something similar. I don't think this is one of the more powerful elements of the game, but it does let us know exactly where we stand with Mr. Jefferson.
That's what separates the artist from the amateur.
It's cool, Nathan. Don't stress. You're okay, bro. Just count to 3. Don't be scared. You own this school. If I wanted, I could blow it up. You're the boss.
The previous sequence was a low-tension sequence that was largely about trying to disengage. Now we're ratcheting up the tension. We are trying to build to a much, much more tense and aggressive situation, and we do that by showing someone that's obviously a little unhinged and letting him rant.
So what do you want?
I hope you checked the perimeter, as my step-ass would say.
That is a fantastic introduction for Chloe. We find out that she's pragmatic, and she's aggressive, and she's actively checking the perimeter. She is also talking about her step-ass, so we know she's got family problems, and he turns out to be very important in the long run. Excellent line. Excellent.
Now, let's talk business.
I got nothing for you.
Wrong. You got hella cash.
3 very short lines later, and we know exactly what's going on and exactly how everyone feels about it. Those lines would not have worked if this was pure text or an RPG without 3D camera work, because it needed the context of the body language and the voice acting and the camera. All of that stuff needed to come together to support those very, very fast lines.
That's my family, not me.
Oh, boo-hoo, poor little rich kid. I know you've been pumping drugs and shit to kids around here.
Hiding your exposition inside of a confrontation is better than nothing, but the big question you need to ask is, do the players have to know this stuff right now? And in this case, I think the answer is no. Before you do any exposition, explain it to yourself. Why does the player have to know this at the moment? If you can hold off, especially since it'll make your characters seem more complex and three-dimensional if you don't know absolutely everything at all times.
I bet your respectable family would help me out if I went to them. Man, I can see the headlines now.
Leave them out of this bitch.
We're out of exposition land and into an arc. Conversation arcs are very important, and you should definitely use them as much as possible. Any long conversation needs to have rising and falling tension, so what we've done is we have Chloe sticking out her claim and Nathan sticking out his claim, and they're going to butt heads over it, and that's going to give us a very natural and powerful sense of rising tension.
I can tell everybody Nathan Prescott is a punk ass who begs like a little girl and talks to himself.
You don't know who the fuck I am or who you're messing around with.
Where'd you get that?
The gun is part of the dialogue. Context matters. Context matters almost more than the dialogue.
What are you doing? Come on, put that thing down!
Ever tell me what to do.
Max is now engaging. It's really important that I make this super clear. The context matters more than the dialogue, and in this case, Max re-engaging is an incredibly important factor that you need to draw the attention of the audience to, so you put in a shot specifically of her doing just that.
I'm so sick of people trying to control me.
You are going to get in hella more trouble for this than drugs.
Nobody would ever even miss your punk ass, would they?
Get that gun away from me, psycho! No!
What a great resolution to that arc. It also pulls Max in, and that's really powerful. If you're going to have an arc, the resolution should matter to the player. And if it was two random people that we don't know about, then that resolution wouldn't have mattered much. But because Max has an opinion on it, the player will have an opinion on it. So you can study this at great detail if you want to learn more about creating dialogue arcs.
Man, Nathan Prescott is messed up and dangerous. This day never ends.
That's a pacing line to ease the players into the new scene. The rest of this dialogue is a good combination of character detailing and exposition, but notice that this dialogue has a lot of constraints. The characters can't move much, they aren't actually facing each other, there's not much body language going on, although Max is seated really quite close, much closer than she really should be, and as I've said before, physical distance is equal to emotional distance, so Max is engaging as best she can given the constraints. Since both characters are facing the same direction and not at each other, they're naturally going to have a slightly disengaged conversation, and you can see that unfold as we go through the lines.
Oh, and thanks, Chloe. After 5 years, you're still Max Caulfield.
Those lines would not have worked if the two characters were facing each other. Those are naturally disengaged lines. So this is really important. Context matters so much. You should think of context before you write anything, because normally speaking, the dialogue is subordinate to the context.
Don't give me the guilty face. At least pretend you're glad to see me.
I am seriously glad to see you. Oh, and thanks, Chloe. It makes perfect sense I'd see you today.
Yes, it's been that kind of day.
Imagine how those lines would have felt if the two characters were facing each other at short range. They would have felt very personal and very emotional. Because the two characters are not directly facing each other, it gives you some latitude on that emotional content. You can write dialogue that would be too emotional if it was delivered in a different context. In this context, it feels just right.
So what did that freak want with you?
Hopefully nothing after today. So, how do you know Nathan?
He's just another Arcadia asshole. Your friend really took a beat down for you.
Because the two characters aren't facing each other, not only is the emotional content damped, but the way that they stick to each other is also damped. In this case, Chloe changes the conversation immediately to a different topic, and it feels fairly natural because she's already in a disengaged position.
Warren? Yeah, I owe him big time.
You're not the only one in debt, and you're already causing trouble.
I thought it would be quiet here. Feels so weird to be back.
Really neat exposition trick here. When you need another character to give an opinion on something, you naturally have to describe what you are giving an opinion about. So that's exposition. A nice combo. Character detailing and exposition all rolled into one. Great trick, you should use it.
So I guess Seattle sucked hard?
Another false choice. False choices really do help the player connect to the character because they can pretend that they know what the character is thinking now that they have chosen what the character is thinking. These are really great and easy to put in, so you might consider using them, but be careful. It becomes a little bit too obvious if you use them a lot. Life is Strange gets around that by having you rewind time and take a third option most of the time.
No, it felt like a real city for artists. Big and bright. Great for taking pictures.
Gently inject some character detailing. Max is obsessed with pictures. Got it yet?
Yeah, must be hard coming back to a hick town like Arcadia again.
Not after seeing you.
Please, girl. You came back for Blackwell Academy.
Another false choice.
Of course, it's one of the best photography programs in the country. And my favorite teacher, Mark Jefferson.
One of the recurring problems with the dialogue in this game is that characters will often tell us how they feel about other characters rather than showing us. This is a really big problem when it's the Avatar, because I sure as hell don't like Mark Jefferson, and her telling me that she does isn't gonna change that.
So you came back to Arcadia for a teacher, not your best friend.
Don't you think I'm happy to see you?
Notice that questions almost never get answered. That's something that you can really only do when the characters aren't directly facing each other. You can talk in circles as long as you're not directly engaged, and both of the characters are dodging a lot in this conversation. I think that's great.
No, you were happy to wait 5 years without a call or even a text.
False choice.
I'm sorry. I know things were tough on you when I left.
How do you know? You weren't even here.
I didn't order my parents to move specifically to fuck you over, Chloe.
You've been at Blackwell for almost a month without letting me know. Enough said.
The context can support this kind of circular, disengaged dialogue, so that's the right choice. This may not be the right choice for when you're writing a touching reunion that's got some thorns in it. It really does depend on what you want to do, but the context is going to make all the difference.
I just wanted to settle in first and not be such a shy, cliche geek.
If we go with the assumption that she knows that she's in love with Chloe, or that she's super impressed with Chloe at least, then we can tell that that is something true. She was really trying to refine herself before going back to Chloe. So what seems like a betrayal could have other sorts of reasons behind it. However, that's never fully developed in this game, and I think it was a missed opportunity. In later conversations, that line could have been brought back and been made to mean so much more. Threads are important.
I totally would have contacted you.
I bet you don't use these sad excuses on Mr. Jefferson. Don't use them on me, Max.
So that was the end of that conversational arc, and there's naturally a need to adjust the pacing at the end of these arcs so that you can move into the next arc or into the next scene without feeling jarring, and you can also let the result of the arc sink in this case, the fact that Chloe still feels a little betrayed by Max.
Broken. Man, are you serial?
Wow, haven't heard that one in a while.
Not everything changes. Except my camera has officially taken a shit.
At first, this may seem like it's just more exposition, but the reason her camera broke was specifically to give these characters an opportunity to grow closer trying to fix it. So what's going on here is not exposition, it's a character arc, or at least a relationship arc. Moreover, it's the beginning of a new conversation arc.
My step douche has a boatload of tools. Maybe you can fix it at my place.
I need very specific, tiny tools.
Nerd alert. My stepdad has a fully stocked garage, and he actually is a tiny tool.
I love that line, and I have no advice on how to learn how to write lines like that. Some lines come naturally to different kinds of writers, and you should try and find the kind of writing you're best at. If it happens to be stupid puns that work really, really well, then that is what you should pursue.
Welcome home, Max.
Sure you don't want to be alone?
Have a seat, Pete.
Again, a false choice, but the point here is that we are now seated, facing out, away from each other again. So it's another disconnected conversation, but notice that this time, Max has tilted her body towards Chloe. Max is trying to engage. This is subtle, but it's much more important than it might initially seem. This kind of context will drive how your dialogue unfolds, even if it's only ever you that is aware of it.
My pleasure. Feels nice out here after all that drama.
You really took one for Team Chloe.
I'm not as brave as you. And David is indeed a step douche.
I'm sorry you had to experience it firsthand.
You have to live with him. Has he always been this way?
Ever since my desperate mom dragged his ass to our home, I never trusted David.
Can you see how Max is engaging here and Chloe is largely remaining aloof? Certainly she's not unhappy, in fact she's cheerful, but she's not properly engaging. She's not volunteering anything, she's not asking questions, she's just responding. Let's skip over the next couple of minutes.
I knew it. He's so hella fucking paranoid. I'll keep this a secret for now.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss.
No wonder I'm so miserable. Everybody in this town knows everybody's secrets.
Even yours?
Not anymore.
So what do you have on Nathan?
He's an elite asshole who sells bad shit cut with laxative.
Always ask yourself, does the player have to know this now? The answer here is yes, so this should have been when we learned that Nathan was a drug dealer. It's mandatory to go through this anyway, you should have skipped it back in the bathroom.
And he dosed me with some drug in his room.
What?
I met him in some shithole bar that didn't card me. He was too rich for the place and too wasted, and he kept flashing bills.
Just tell me what happened, Chloe. Now.
These kinds of personal, long-winded confessions are a little bit hard to do right. In fact, it gets screwed up later when Kate does the same basic thing and the pacing isn't there. The long conversation leading up to this was well done, because it allowed us to get into the mood to listen to Chloe. Maybe it went on a little bit long, but overall, well done. On the other hand, this conversation is more dense than it appears, because there's a lot of things that the player needs to know. All of this stuff also happened to Kate, and who knows who else, and there's some foreshadowing to that effect if you actually listen to the conversation. An additional trick is that Max keeps prodding Chloe on. This isn't just Chloe talking and talking and talking. The feedback from a second character, or even 2 or 3 other characters, pushes her into further confessions, further talking, and that is a powerful technique that keeps the player invested as well.
I was an idiot. I thought he was so blazed it would be an easy score.
You needed money that bad?
Actually, yes. I owe big time. And I thought I'd have enough for me and Rachel if she showed up.
Another important trick to get your backstories and your exposition working, you can't just explain it. The player needs to have a connection. And in this case, that connection is understanding why Chloe did what she did. You don't have to go into great detail. You don't have to be explicit about it. You don't have to be like, I, as Chloe, decided to do this for the sake of someone else because I'm just that kind of noble lady. A gentle reminder, one half of one line thrown in is enough. You just have to make sure that the player can make an emotional connection to this long-winded story.
How much do you owe?
$3,000 plus interest.
Basic technique, if you make the player ask for exposition, they will feel happy that they got it rather than bored.
And before I could get a chunk of that from Nathan, he dosed my drink with some shit.
God, Chloe. I can't believe this. I mean, I do. Then what?
I know I passed out on the floor. I woke up and that perv was smiling, crawling towards me with a camera.
Go on.
Everything was a blur. I tried to kick him in the balls and broke a lamp. Nathan freaked, so I managed to bum rush the door and get the hell out. Max, it was insane.
I am so furious, I can't even speak. What did you do then?
I figured I would make him pay me to keep quiet. So we met in the bathroom.
And he brought a gun.
That was Nathan's last mistake.
And now that we've run out of past, we naturally move into the present and into the future. That arc collapses. It's over. I'm not sold on that conversational arc. I think that it was a little bit too extremely long. But if you have a need to do that sort of backstory and just talk about it all in one big blarf, that is a pretty good example of how to do it. The emotional content is about right. The pacing is about right. It just goes on a little too long for my tastes.
He's still dangerous, Chloe. Not just to you.
Oh, good thing you notified the principal. I feel safer already.
I won't always be there to save you.
You were here today, Max. You saved me. I'm still tripping on that. Seeing you after all these years feels like...
Destiny.
I let that unfold mostly on its own because I wanted you to get a feel for the kind of pacing that an emotional conversation arc can have as the tension rises and then at the end when it reaches its conclusion. This whole time, Chloe has been carefully folded off away from the world. She's been facing away from Max, her arms have been crossed, she hasn't been properly engaging, and now she's been lured out of that stance. So it's a good resolution. As always, a conversational arc ends and the context changes.
If this is destiny, I hope we can find Rachel. I miss her, Max. This shit pit has taken away everyone I've ever loved. I'd like to drop a bomb on Arcadia Bay and turn it to fucking glass.
I call this a smash conclusion. You just blow away your dialogue with some other concern, you don't actually resolve it within itself. Use that very sparingly. It's usually a sign that your dialogue isn't built well enough and that your arcs can't be properly resolved, in which case you should fix your dialogue and resolve your arcs. In this case, it's because they really wanted to have our psychic lady do psychic things, and they needed to put it in somehow, and they decided that this was as good a place as any. I think it feels really clumsy here, but keep it in mind as an option. Just don't overuse it.
Oh, Chloe!
I keep saying that the dialogue needs to serve the theme and the arc, and it needs to be in the right place and driving in the right direction. Well, this is an example of how to do it wrong. This dialogue is very well written, but because it's in the wrong place and going in the wrong direction at the wrong time, it actually sabotages the forward motion of the story. This dialogue happens directly before the nightmare scene, but it lets us know that the nightmare scene is just a nightmare. In addition, the emotional resonance that this scene builds up is dashed to pieces by the nightmare scene, which isn't about Chloe, it's about us. So in all respects, it's very badly placed inside the story, and it could have come after the nightmare scene instead.
I see that the real Max is back. So how was your time trip, dude?
Shut up. Oh, you're alive. You're alive. Oh, both of us. I did so much to bring you back, Chloe. It worked. It actually worked.
This dialogue indicates that Chloe is going to be our major concern in the upcoming moments. Unfortunately, that's not true. It turns out that our major concern is randomly other people who aren't Chloe talking shit about us in a nightmare. It doesn't flow very well, and it's what happens when you try to drive an arc with dialogue instead of driving dialogue with an arc.
You're with me again. Looks like even fate doesn't want us apart. And I traveled through multiple realities just to save my ungrateful ass over and over, and I hope it was worth it. But I don't blame you for wanting me out of your life after all my drama.
That's extremely pushy dialogue, and I've said this before, let's try and make it clear. If you're going to bring in some kind of emotional content, and you're going to have the characters basically whine, you need to be very careful to build that up properly, and this scene hasn't earned it. So it feels very forced, and it feels very pushy. So when you're writing, be careful to understand how much emotion you're putting in the scene, and whether or not the scene can actually handle it.
Come on. I'm the official drama king and queen of Arcadia Bay this week. Just look at what my powers have caused in just a short time. Nobody.
I don't know if it's just me, but whining brinksmanship is a pet peeve. Really avoid having one character whine and then having the other character whine more. That feels like a disengaging tactic, even if it's not intended as one, and it also feels very boring and passive-aggressive. I just don't like it, even in real life.
You're Max fucking Caulfield, Time Warrior.
Directly addressing a whine with a response is definitely a better tactic, and this is a pretty good line.
Even if you weren't, you're kind and caring. Nobody could have a better best friend. Nobody. You didn't ask for any of this to happen, but it did. You need to accept how awesome you are.
Powerful emotional elements here. I don't think the scene can support them, but even if the scene could support them, these kinds of powerful elements have to be more or less the apex of the scene, or at least lead to a player choice. If you back down from a heavily emotional element like this and then patter on for some more time, you really end up wasting all that energy.
Maybe I willed it subconsciously or something.
Case in point.
I always wanted my life to be special. An adventure. But not without you.
So, you're just gonna let that slide by? That's pretty much like the biggest part of the scene. It might not be a confession of romantic love, but it sure is a confession of love. You're just gonna let that slide in a scene that's totally worthless? Make sure the dialogue serves the arc.
And it didn't happen until I moved back here. So, without you, my powers wouldn't even exist.
Who cares? You just confessed your love. Who cares? Stop distracting from the point of the scene.
And for whatever scientific, mystical reason that we'll obviously never figure out.
This is called lampshade hanging, and whether you think it's good or bad, it's definitely the lowest tension thing you can do. So don't put it in a scene about confessing love.
We were meant to be together at this exact moment in history. I have to think that Rachel was somewhere behind the scenes, fighting for justice.
This scene is such a mess. Every individual line is written well, but they're put together with absolutely no rhyme or reason. And this is why I wanted to use it as an example of how not to do things.
I'd like to think that too. We all owe Rachel Amber. Now tell me everything that happened. You remember, right?
Well, we left the party and made sure Jefferson couldn't find us. For once, I was glad I lived in an actual fortress. Then the storm got hella crazy, and you said we would be safe at the lighthouse.
Wow, a rare case of just flat-out exposition. Always ask yourself, does the player have to know that now? The next scene is a nightmare scene, with no relation to reality at all. So the answer would be, no. Stop wasting the player's time.
Chloe, look. The storm's getting bigger now. It's coming closer.
You want to know the funny thing? I consider that to be a good line. See, the point of this scene is theoretically to show that things are coming to a head. You've saved Chloe, but the rest of the world is starting to really fall apart. So stating that the storm is getting bigger is a good way to subtly hammer that home. It doesn't matter, the scene's not arranged correctly, but it could have been a good line.
I can't even believe this is real. This is happening because of me.
Stop it! Stop beating yourself up, okay? We've both paid our dues already on it.
I think they're trying to set up Chloe's last arc here, where she eventually decides to sacrifice herself, but it's really not very well done. Maybe it's just that the rest of the scene is so disorganized it doesn't end up working out very well. I might have put it at the beginning to help raise tension rather than at the end.
God, look at that. Look at that monster. Who knows? This could be Rachel's revenge. Our revenge.
Does that serve the theme? No.
The lighthouse is out of the way of the tornado. Come on!
And another smash away ending.
I've got your back, Rex.
If you want to learn how to write layered dialogue, we should look to the past. This past, specifically.
I volunteer to break the eggs.
Do you remember how many eggs?
Mom said it depends.
That's true.
So, how many eggs?
Don't you dare question the chef.
Right, like you're the real cook here.
Did you miss it? The theme of that episode of the game is that you can't save everybody. There are a lot of different ways to write layered dialogue, but my favorite is when the layered dialogue reinforces the theme, and that's a great example. You can't do that unless you have a theme and you know what it is. So, themes. Let's learn to write really warm and inviting character dialogue. This scene has some of the best character dialogue in the game, and we should definitely learn as much as we can from it. Keep in mind that the context here is one that invites this conversation. This would not have been possible if the two had just randomly met on the street or whatever. So, as always, the context drives the dialogue.
San Francisco is so cool. And this gallery is huge.
Now that we've set the tone and the pace using that long intro, it's time to put the character and the player into the world. Voila.
So is the buffet. If an event skimps on the food, you know it's a bad event.
Establish the other character as having a different viewpoint, in this case, experience, and therefore you can use those two different viewpoints to grow very natural and powerful dialogue.
As long as I don't have to eat any caviar.
Set up for a cute callback later.
This is your day, Max. You can do whatever you want.
Establish his goals and his role.
I hope you take advantage of your status and talk to as many influential people here as possible. Work the room.
I don't know. I feel so weird, like I'm a little kid hanging with the adults.
Max, after this week, you are certainly not a little kid anymore. In fact, you're a noteworthy adult being honored by your peers. Now you have to start acting like the photographer you want to be.
There is an urge to write nuanced, layered, complex dialogue, but the simple truth is, if the characters have a relationship that's worth exploring, the dialogue doesn't have to reach very far. It just has to serve the relationship.
Hell, I wanted to be in charge of a big school someday. So I started taking charge of things when I was young. Ask my poor classmates.
The point of this scene is that he's pulling her into the world of adults, ushering her in, and giving her advice. The dialogue doesn't have to be complex, but you do have to make sure that the audience understands that. And a big part of that is the staging. We can see he's literally walking her into the gallery.
Max, I'm going to eat up that caviar so you don't have to.
Callbacks are a great way to close the circle and end the conversational arc. And in this case, it was a very cute callback. Very well done.
Better get in there and start schmoozing. You know, I won't always be here to take charge. But you come talk to me whenever you want.
There has to be a control panel for the lights around here.
Although the middle-aged manness of the writer does come through a little bit heavy in this scene, the underpinnings are very solid character writing. Let's take a look and examine the fundamental ways in which you might do character dialogue in a scene like this. Keep in mind that the context is very powerful here. They have an excuse to talk like this because something interesting is happening. They're not just randomly talking over a table or something. One of this author's major advantages is his patience. He has a lot of really beautiful slow transitions like that one that feel completely unforced and really let the scene build up a little bit. The context has to mature in the player's brain, and that's a great way to do it. Let it take a little bit of time. Let it soak in a little bit.
Time to do or dive, Max.
Oh yeah, baby. Feels like a hot tub. And with my cash dash, I'm queen of the world. Bow.
The point of this scene is how much these two are enjoying themselves. Therefore, the dialogue needs to pull the player into that mode of thinking. And that's a great way to do it. You just explicitly let them enjoy themselves. The dialogue serves the arc.
Tell me you're not gonna stand there watching me like a zombie.
There's a lot of subtext in these lines.
Don't you dare! Come stop me, hippie!
Okay, you asked for it.
Okay, there's a lot going on here. Let's just cover the concept of stage direction in this scene. There's a huge number of stage direction elements here, a lot of blocking, a lot of body language, and it could have gone a very, very different way if they'd used even slightly different stage directions. For example, what if Chloe had stared at Max the whole time Max was changing? Would have been a very different kind of scene. So the stage direction is critical, and you can't just leave it aside. It changes the way the scene unfolds, it changes the context of the scene.
Cowabunga!
So let's talk about this just a little bit. Chloe has been established as enjoying herself. Chloe has been enjoying herself the whole time. She's been very chipper, and when she jumped into the pool, she even brought that to the surface by explicitly saying how much she was enjoying herself. Everything from then has been to lure Max, and therefore the player, into also enjoying themselves. And now Max has engaged with Chloe. She's entered into Chloe's arena, and now she is committed to also enjoying herself. All very subtly done, no forcing at all.
Why, look, an otter in my water. Dun 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 dun.
You're so obvious. And I still get freaked out by that movie, so stop. I can't even watch any of those shark shows.
That dialogue was aimed pretty squarely at the player, but it works well in scene. It's transition dialogue. It shows the two are properly engaging with each other. The wheels are beginning to turn, they're enjoying each other's company, and they're becoming more friendly, closer, more intimate. Alright, that dialogue arc is complete. Max is now engaged, the player is engaged, everyone's enjoying themselves. We can now pivot and turn into a new arc. Don't do it too fast, though.
I'll just rewind and harpoon you. Otter's revenge.
Cheater.
Yeah, you wouldn't know about that.
Although a little bit rough, that dialogue shows that the two are now properly just flat out bantering with each other, and it lets it cool down a little bit after that arc completed. Now that we're done cooling down, we can properly pivot.
I wish Rachel was here. She would totally love being in here at night. Wish you guys had met each other.
We will. With all this stuff going on, I'm starting to think everything is related, and I want to find out for Kate's sake. She almost died today.
I'm not sold on those particular lines, but this is now the beginning of a new arc, and those lines started it off. This arc is a much more somber and personal arc about our own personal emotional investments, and it needs to have a scene that can support it. Good news, this scene can definitely support it. The flow has been very good, and the two are now very engaged and working very well together. They're ready to talk like this.
Your power is changing everything, Max. Especially you. I can already tell. You're not so chicken shit anymore.
Thanks, girlfriend.
Notice the blocking? Physical distance is emotional distance, so now their emotional distance has decreased. But they're not facing each other. They're facing a shared direction. That means they're ready to talk about their shared future and their shared future concerns, but not about their direct importance to each other. Not just yet. That's why they keep this light and they use some disengage techniques.
You know what I mean. You're becoming like this force of nature.
More like luck of nature. Come on, my power failed trying to rescue Kate. Maybe I'm just stumbling back and forth in time. For what reason?
You didn't stumble when you saved me, Max.
Not that time. But that's because you were there to kickstart my power.
So it's time to start moving forward in time. And we're obviously connected, since without me you would have never discovered your power, right?
Putting aside the actual words used in that dialogue, think about the way that it's structured. Because at the end, that last statement, that's Chloe desperately trying to fit into Max's life. And it bleeds through wonderfully, not just in the dialogue, but in the delivery, in the facial expression, in the pattern of how things unfold. Dialogue isn't just about putting words down.
Absolutely. You make me feel like I know what I'm doing.
And you make me feel like I have a reason for still being in Arcadia Bay.
I hope so.
Stop being so goddamn humble. You're like the smartest, most talented person I've ever known.
Here's a really great example of writing dialogue that was too powerful. That was way, way too powerful. But the delivery was excellent. Think about how much more potent that would have been if the two were facing each other directly, or even if Chloe had just been looking at Max while she said it. It would have carried too much power. So the same dialogue, slightly different delivery, completely different result.
More than Rachel Amber?
Max doesn't want to engage at that level, so she backs off with a disengage technique and brings that potency down yet another layer. That makes it just right.
Dude, I'm not her groupie, okay? And I'm sure you have Blackwell bros all over you. Like Warren.
Chloe's dialogue here is really, really good. I bet the voice actress wrote it. It's clear that Chloe is trying to figure out how she fits into Max's life and where the lines are going to get drawn. But it's also clear that Max doesn't know that. The characters have different goals in this dialogue, and that can lead to a lot of really, really powerful exchanges, and it does. It's not a fight, but definitely they're going in completely different directions, and it's working out really, really well in terms of how this arc unfolds.
Ew. I don't want any Blackwell bros over me. There's a couple cute guys there, but they probably think I'm a total nerd.
Nerds are hot. You just don't have any confidence yet.
Subtle.
Unfortunately, that didn't come with my rewind power.
Max disengages again. Chloe finally gives up on the arc, it collapses, and we move into the last phase.
No worries. Once you get over yourself, you're gonna make the world bow.
As long as you're there with me.
Don't look so sad. I'm never leaving you.
Wonderfully done. The point of the scene is to get the player invested in Max and Chloe. In order to do that, we had to spend a lot of time learning their emotions, respecting their emotions, and getting really invested in their relationship. And that all came to a head with that last exchange and that last look. Only possible because of all that time we spent.
Now I'm getting cold in here. Because we're yapping instead of attacking each other, otter versus shark style. I think I've had my pool experience for the year. Let's jet.
Let's call it a draw. I'm gonna freeze my ass off when I get out.
Some pretty iffy phrasing there, but these slow transitions are this author's real strength. So this is Joyce's big introductory dialogue, and it is a great way to study how the context drives the dialogue. Nearly every single dialogue option, nearly every single dialogue element is driven by the context that we've set up, both here and in the past. It's also worth noting that, just as an aside, Max is seated, so she's looking up to Joyce, which is what Max does. She looks up to Joyce.
And there she is. Lovely young woman. How are you doing, Max?
Hi, Joyce. It's nice to see you again. You look the same.
Like I'm still a waitress at Two Whales after all these years.
No, like you still look pretty.
A lot of writers have a hard time writing those first few lines of dialogue, but in the end, the easiest way to do it is to just figure out which pieces of the context you want to make really, really at the top of the player's mind. And in this case, we want the player to know how the two feel about each other, but we also want the player to know that Joyce is stuck in a rut and has been for a real long time.
Nice save, kid. You're still smart. But not that smart. Now you get busted for smoking pot.
This is the beginning of a simple but powerful dialogue arc. They've chosen to bring out another piece of the context. Joyce really does love her daughter, but she also recognizes that her daughter is in a rough spot right now. So what she's doing is she's trying to figure out how Max fits into this puzzle and what Max can be trusted to do. She definitely knows that it wasn't Max's joint.
I heard the whole sordid story from David. I'm sorry this was how you had to meet him. He's a good man, no matter what Chloe says.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't even smoke, like, ever. It was almost an accident. It was very stupid. I'm sorry.
It surprised me fierce. I was hoping you could be a good influence in her life now.
I will be. Promise.
Joyce finishes the arc and makes her decision. Now we can transition to a new arc. Transitions are a little bit difficult, but they're also very freeing because you can do a lot of different things with them. The big thing here is you can't pivot too fast, and you also can't break the reality of the scene. So we'll turn to Max.
I know things were hard for you and Chloe. I feel bad I didn't call. Now my folks are in Seattle, and I'm all alone at Blackwell. It's my karma.
Basic rule, don't let one side of the conversation dominate too much. Joyce has made some pretty big decisions and called some pretty big shots here. Now it's time to let Max run wild a little bit, even though, in the end, Joyce is still in full control of this conversation.
You did the right thing. You moved forward with your life. I did after William passed on. Chloe chose to stay angry.
All right, transition over. Now we're going to move into the next arc, which is about Chloe. More specifically, Joyce wants to talk about how Chloe isn't adjusting. And her goal here is to let Max gently know that, boy, it would be great if Max could help out a little bit with making her daughter not self-destruct. That would be pretty cool, nifty keen. Also, Chloe's about to come in through the door, and it would be great if we could put that idea of Chloe in the player's mind so that when Chloe comes in, the player is all, yay, it's Chloe!
Anyway, I hope we see more of you. Chloe needs an old friend again.
Joyce, I am so sorry about William. I have great memories of him.
So this is a fun cheat. It would have felt super aggressive if Joyce was banging on about her daughter all the time. So what they did is they allowed Joyce to back down, and they bring in Max with some supporting lines, and Max can wrangle this conversation around to give Joyce a better attack angle so that Joyce doesn't feel like she's just going on and on and on about her daughter all the time. The characters aren't competing. They're just conversing, and you can use anybody with any sort of point of view they've got to help move the conversation forward in a natural manner.
I'm glad, Max. That was his gift to us. Wonderful memories, even if Chloe doesn't understand yet.
Chloe understands. She just needs time. I know that sucks for you.
And now Joyce is like, thank you for the opportunity. This is a great attack angle. Let's go ahead and talk about my daughter at great length, because that is what I want to do.
Oh, she hit all the phases. Expulsion, running away, drugs, bad boys, tattoos, piercings, blue hair. Now she's got to rebel against her stepfather.
I see why.
Break the topic so it doesn't get too aggressive. I'm not sure I would have made that call, but that's what they did.
Do you? He's not as much of a hard ass as you think. But you did tell him you had a joint, right? You took that responsibility?
Back to the first arc for a second.
I did, and I am sorry. I don't want Chloe in any more trouble. Or me.
Nobody's in trouble over a doobie, Max. And I admire that you took the heat for Chloe. Like a great friend. But Chloe does push David, and it's not fair.
Please help me with my daughter.
He paid his dues in a war. He does care about her, along with all the students at Blackwell.
So please help me make her stop.
I get it, Joyce. I know Chloe still likes to stir things up.
Yeah, she does provoke people, especially David. I just want us to be a family soon.
Arc resolved. Let's transition into the next arc.
I guess it's all about time.
Using thematic key phrases can be a great way to do some transition padding as long as your tension isn't too high, because it's a pretty low tension thing to do.
I think you're right, Joyce.
So, now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What do you want to eat?
There we go. Arc resolved and transitioned out of. We're not ready to start the next arc yet, so let's take it nice and slow, let the player soak things up, and I'm going to skip ahead, because that's like 3 minutes long.
I can hear your stomach rumbling from here, Max. Here, you'll love this.
I'm drooling like a baby.
still can't believe you're a woman. When I look at pictures of Chloe,
Basic priming. Remember, we're talking about Chloe. Please think about Chloe. This is all about Chloe. Ready for the Chloe entrance?
speak of the devil.
All of Chloe's blocking is incredible in this scene.
Mom and Max, together again.
And Chloe looking for a free meal. You put your whole damn college fund on your tab.
I'm treating Chloe for breakfast.
I don't know whether that was on purpose, but to me, those two lines are excellent, excellent lines. Very layered, because, Chloe doesn't have a future. She certainly isn't going to college, but Max might be able to give her a little bit of a future.
Are you atoning for yesterday?
Oh God, Mom, please do not give Max any shit for that. She apologized.
I know she did. Max is a good girl. Woman. She's 18 now.
This is the first scene with both Joyce and Chloe, so it's important to establish their relationship. But it's also important for Joyce to let Chloe know that she approves of us, but disapproves of the shenaniganery.
Too old to get lectures from you or Sergeant Pepper.
Call him David if you don't want to be lectured.
Joyce can't deal with her daughter, that's why she's hoping to lean on us.
You only get one damn slice of bacon a day.
You guys are still the same.
Another reason to blow this town. What is this shit on the jukebox?
Now we've transitioned out of that arc, and we're moving into a new arc with some excellent blocking.
Now that that's out of the way. Let's talk about your superpower.
Let's not, because that part's really bad. But what wonderful blocking leading up to it. Alright, time for the biggest scene of the game. The last scene, the ending. This is a very emotional sequence, but we're ready for it. Not only have we spent the whole game connecting to these characters, but we've also just spent about 5 minutes walking through a diorama filled with all of our memories of Chloe. We're now ready to feel the full brunt of our connection and have a whole bunch of emotions hit us. Because of that, the dialogue is not nuanced, it's not complex, it's not layered, it's not clever, it doesn't have to be. The relationship here, the context that we're in, we don't need to use any tricks. All we need to do is bring that to the surface.
Max! Max, can you hear me? Please say something.
Chloe? I must have passed out.
Thank God. Don't you ever do that again, okay?
I swear. But that nightmare was so real. It was so horrible.
We're transitioning out of the nightmare sequence and into this new sequence, so there's some transition dialogue for you.
This is my storm. I caused this. I caused all of this. I changed fate and destiny so much that I actually did alter the course of everything. All I really created was just death and destruction.
This is a dialogue arc. Yeah, no matter how emotional it gets, it's the same basic underpinnings, the same basic structure.
Fuck all of that, okay?
Chloe sets her stake. She's not going to let you feel guilty for this. More generally, she's going to protect you from feeling guilty about this.
You were given a power. You didn't ask for it. And you saved me. Which had to happen. All of this did. Except for what happened to Rachel.
To me, Rachel isn't really part of this context, and therefore lines about her feel super off topic.
But without your power, we wouldn't have found her. Okay, so you're not the goddamn Time Master, but you're Maxine Caulfield. And you're amazing.
Don't be afraid to let your dialogue breathe.
Max. This is the only way.
So this is the end of Chloe's character arc. She has become willing to sacrifice herself for the people of the town, when previously she was talking about how much she'd like to glass the town. That's a wonderful character arc. It wasn't brought to the surface as much as I would have liked it to be, but it was still pretty good. It's also perfectly in line with her desire to protect Max from feeling guilty by just making it so that Max never caused any of this.
I feel like I took the shot 1,000 years ago.
You could use that photo to change everything right back to when you took that picture. All that would take is for me to...
Fuck that! No way! You are my #1 priority now. You are all that matters to me.
And now it's a fight. They have mutually exclusive goals. So how is it going to resolve? That will naturally drive dialogue. It will naturally drive a tremendous amount of dialogue. If you ever have a hard time writing dialogue, make it a fight.
I know. You prove that over and over again. Even though I don't deserve it. I'm so selfish. Not like my mom. Look what she had to give up and live through. And she did. She deserves so much more than to be killed by a storm in a fucking diner. Even my stepfather deserves her alive. There's so many more people in Arcadia Bay who should live. Way more than me.
Cementing Chloe's character arc and making sure that we know who she is now.
Don't say that! I won't trade you!
You're not trading me. Maybe you've just been delaying my real destiny. Look at how many times I've almost died or actually died around you. Look at what's happened in Arcadia Bay ever since you first saved me. I know I've been selfish, but for once, I think I should accept my fate. Our fate, Chloe.
This is a pretty typical technique to making an argument. You lay out the logical part, and she's done that. Now she's going to try and lay out the emotional part. She's trying to win Max over and win this fight.
Max, you finally came back to me this week, and you did nothing but show me your love and friendship. You made me smile and laugh like I haven't done in years. Wherever I end up after this, in whatever reality, all those moments between us were real, and they'll always be ours. No matter what you choose, I know you'll make the right decision.
Chloe, I can't make this choice.
No, Max. You're the only one who can.
In the end, it's up to the player to decide which way this conversation goes and which direction Max completes her character arc. All told, I really enjoyed this game and I loved examining it because there's so much you can learn from it. If you go and play it again with an eye on the dialogue, I'm sure you'll see a lot more than you did the first time. But just as a suitable ending, I want to remind you that the dialogue always serves the scene. If your dialogue doesn't need to do much, don't make it do much. It can be nice and short.
Max, it's time.
Not anymore.